to the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast, coming to you from the Play Draft Studios, with your hosts, Mike Wright, Ben Cummins, and Chris Meaney.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. This is the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. I am your host, per usual, Mike, the Fantasy Hitman Wright. You can follow me in my ramblings on Twitter at FFHitman. Today I am joined, per usual, by Chris Meaney of the Fantasy Sports Network. You follow his musings online at Chris Meaney over on the Twitter. Chris Meaney, how are you doing this fine day? How was your holiday season, your Christmas? How's everything going right now?
Good, very good. Busy. Hopefully you and yours and all your listeners all had a very good holiday as well. And now we're into week 17. It's always a wild week 17, but I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Week 1 and week 17 bring very much of the same thing of just an uncertainty because you're not sure what certain teams are going to do. By the way, Ben Cummins is enjoying a lovely vacation, a holiday vacation, I imagine. I don't know. Whatever.
Must be nice.
His takes are too hot for this show sometimes because they're just so good. But you can follow him on Twitter at BenCumminsFF. He will be back with the rest of us because we aren't going anywhere. We're going to be here until DFS is done. Throughout the playoffs, we're going to help you with those wild card, those divisional games. We're all about that life because that's what you have to do, right? In the NFL playoffs is your season it's done, the redraft, the dynasty, it's pretty much wrapped up. You can play some DFS, and we are here for you because this is the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. DFS for the rest of us, helping the little man, helping the little lady get in there, feel confident playing FanDuel, DraftKings, and Draft. Before we jump into our cash picks of the weekend, I want to remind you that the Ultimate DFS Pass, it's just $10 for the rest of the season. So if you want to get in there, have a little bit of fun during the NFL playoffs, we will be providing you with premium content. You find that at dfspass.com. Like I said, just $10. That is stealing, my friends. That is stealing. All right, Chris Meaney, we're going to get into the cash picks unless you have an objection.
I do not. I'm ready to rock, bud.
That's what I wanted to hear.
Straight cash, homie.
All right, Chris Meaney, we're going to let you kick off the show with your cash game quarterback of the week.
Yeah, man, I sat back and watched last week Jimmy Garoppolo. Man, was I impressed with Jimmy Garoppolo against
with his handsomeness?
That too. Like, it's stunning watching this guy. It's like, is he a better quarterback or
is he a model?
Model, right. It was impressive, Mike. It really was. I mean, 21 for 30, 242 passing yards, a couple touchdowns. He ran one in, so 3 total. It was his best showing of this season from a fantasy standpoint. I mean, against the Bears, 293 passing yards, Houston, 334, Tennessee, 381. And yeah, he didn't hit that 300 mark against Jacksonville, but 21 for 30, the 3 total touchdowns, as I mentioned, the best showing, 23 FanDuel points, 23 DraftKings points. This Rams team, they're going to rest guys, and they've already been pretty vocal about it. Sean McVay says they're going to rest some players. So if he could do this against Jacksonville and that defense, I'm pretty sure he can rack up a pretty solid fantasy day for you against what most likely will be backups against the Rams. So just impressed with Jimmy Garoppolo, and we'll get into some of his weapons in a little bit.
Yes, the reason that you will not hear Todd Gurley's name in these cash game picks, I mean, who has been the most solid of solid foundations for all DFS lineups, he's not playing. Jared Goff not playing. Like I said, uncertainty with the teams who have locked things up for the playoffs with nothing left to prove. My cash game pick of the week, Captain Kirk set the phasers to stunning because Captain Kirk, he's got a little bit of handsome in himself as well. He's also, get this, the quarterback 6 on the year, people. 10 fewer points than Tom Brady was Kirk Cousins, the guy who once again was left until the very end of the draft. I scooped him up in my league of record with my very last pick. Absolutely ridiculous, the lack of respect that this man gets. He gets to take on the New York Giants, who are absolutely faltering. And this week, no Collins, no Jenkins, no Apple, no problems for Kirk Cousins, who dropped 242 and 2 on them last or the last time they met this season. And talk about people who are not playing for something. Kirk Cousins is playing for something. He's playing for that green. He's playing for a big, fat stack of cash. He's looking for next year's contract. So I expect Kirk Cousins to give everything he's got against the team that is giving up the most points to quarterbacks on draft, or second most on DraftKings, the most over on FanDuel. That's where I was trying to go. Over at the running back position, Chris Meaney, who do you got?
Yeah, there's a couple just mid-tier backs here that I think, have a pretty good opportunity this week. I'll start with Jamal Williams.
I love this pick. Love it.
$6,700 in FanDuel, but how about the price on DK? $5,200 for Jamal Williams. Likely going to get 20 touches this week. Aaron Jones is probably not going to play in this football game with a knee.
I believe it is confirmed that he's not playing.
Confirmed? Perfect. You like him even better hearing that.
Yes.
Actually, sometimes when you hear that a guy is a little bit questionable, he may play, unlikely to play, and then he's active, it may shy people away from Williams. But even still, there's no reason to shy away. You just confirmed it. And there was a 3-game stretch with Williams when he was the only back in Green Bay. He had 5 total touchdowns, over 140 receiving yards, had over 200 rushing yards. And for Detroit in this matchup, the 5th worst rush DVOA defense in the league, according to Football Outsiders. They've allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to running backs. They've also allowed the 4th most fantasy points per game to backs over the last 4 weeks. So not only have they been bad all year, they've been really bad of late. So Jamal Williams, you can roll him out. It's extremely an affordable price. And I'm sticking with Alex Collins and just looking at again, opportunity and also the matchup here a little bit. Again, DK, I feel like there's a little bit more value for him. $5,600, $6,800 on FanDuel. And this is mostly about the matchup against the Bengals. They've allowed 128.5 rushing yards per game, the 2nd highest total in the league. They've allowed the 7th most on the ground over the last 4 weeks. And Collins has had at least 18 carries. Well, he had 18 carries last week. He's had at least 15 in 5 of his last 6 games. He's got 5 rushing touchdowns over that span. I know, the numbers are really not blowing you away over the past couple weeks, but the biggest takeaway from me, Mike, is just those carries. He's getting those carries and those opportunities. And why I like him a little bit more on DraftKings, well, he's at 18 catches over his last 6 games. So he's also involved in the passing game. I'm not buying into the fact that the Bengals are going to show up here for Lewis in the last little straw. I'm not buying into that. This team has been bad over the last few weeks. This is a must-win situation for Baltimore. They want to get this W. I think they'll lean on Collins. I
love going back to Alex Collins. It's tough. It's tough going back to these guys, but the volume has been there, and that last piece, that's all I was going to add, that the Ravens are playing. They have to win. So the Ravens are playing for something. That makes me like them even more. And I'm going with the free square of the week, potentially. I should put a disclaimer in there. Derrick Henry, if DeMarco Murray is out, which he has been diagnosed with a 3rd-degree strain, I believe it is, of his MCL. They're saying that there's possibly a slight tear. But then, of course, Mike Mularkey, well, I'm not ruling him out. Maybe he plays. We'll see. I mean,
this guy's not going to play.
Yeah, that's where I lean, that DeMarco Murray's not going to play. However, the Titans, they're in a similar boat. They have to win to get into the playoffs. So DeMarco Murray may muster up and play. However, Derrick Henry is, I think, a great play. Only $5,500 over on DraftKings, $5,800 on FanDuel. Jacksonville, it's not the best matchup, but here's the thing. Jacksonville has nothing to play for except for momentum, and I have to believe that they are going to do the smart thing and rest their key players. I mean, especially Ramsey has been beat up for the entire season. Calais Campbell. Why would you play Calais Campbell in this matchup? It just doesn't make sense. So that's why I think Derrick Henry could be just this is the week we've all been waiting for, right?
Right.
Finally, Derrick Henry week. Unfortunately, it's week 17, but you got to get in there while you can. So he's my running back cash game play of the week. I'm going to keep it going here. I already talked about my love for Kirk Cousins this weekend, and I want that stack. I want that double stuff with Jamison Crowder, who, if you remember when Jamison Crowder, remember when he went ham on a team? Yeah, that was the New York Giants. 141, a touchdown. Larry Fitzgerald looked like he was doing Reaper's Ultimate from Overwatch from the slot last week, just decimating the New York Giants. Oh, Jamison Crowder plays the slot as well. The New York Giants, somehow they're only giving up the 11th most points to wide receivers on FanDuel and DraftKings. That's going to go up. I've listed all the players that they're going to be missing this week in the secondary. I think Jamison Crowder is a very safe play, and only $5,800 on DraftKings. I expect the targets and the receptions to come just pouring in for Jamison Crowder this weekend, so I really like him. Who do you got, Chris Meaney?
I love that play as well. Yeah, DeAndre Hopkins, I'm going to sit here and tell everyone play DeAndre Hopkins, but he may be the most safest, and we're coming at you guys with a lot of value plays. And just looking at some other wide receivers that I think are pretty safe here, and I'll go back to the San Francisco 49ers and Jimmy Garoppolo and Marquise Goodwin. I know Goodwin was shut down last week against the Jags, but again, that was
expected.
Nobody should be surprised with that, but I think he'll finish strong here again against a rested Rams squad with really, they've already said they're fine. If they get that 4th seed, they're fine. I actually think it's kind of smart.
They're even better. If they get the 4th seed, that means that they have to go up and play Philadelphia.
Exactly.
Instead of the Minnesota Vikings because of the way that the seeding has worked out. If you ask me and who I want to play Philadelphia. I don't want to play Minnesota.
I think it's extremely smart by Sean McVay. It's, again, this guy is already going to win Coach of the Year. It's just another reason he's going to win it. It's just super smart. They don't have to go into Minnesota, go into Philly. You're right. So they're going to rest some guys here. And the previous 3 games with Jimmy Garoppolo, Goodwin totaled 319 yards on 24 catches. He was by far the number 1 option for Jimmy G. And we know about Goodwin. We know about the air yards, the ADOT, the average depth of target. It's top 10 in the league. And even still, since Jimmy Garoppolo and Goodwin have been playing together, it hasn't just been those long, deep throws. There have been some short completions, which should make you feel a whole lot better about playing Goodwin in cash. $6,900 on FanDuel, $6,600 on DK. I almost feel like he's a lock to get that bonus on DraftKings, that 100-yard bonus, which he's already hit with Jimmy Garoppolo. So I'm a big fan of this duo here this weekend.
I love it, and I love Chris Meaney after he came out with just dropping dollar bills right and left out of his pockets last week, just spending up. It's giving you those value plays. But once again, it's week 17, so things are a little bit crazy. My tight end cash game pick of the week, it's Rob Gronkowski.
Now you're spending.
And now this is where I'm spending up. And this one also comes with a disclaimer. Pay attention to news. This is why we say don't lock in till Sunday morning when you have all the information. But Rob Gronkowski gets the New York Jets. I expect him to absolutely continue his domination, I should say. But Chris Meaney is right. $7,000 on DraftKings, $8,500 over on FanDuel. But here's the narrative for Rob Gronkowski if you want to buy into this. He needs 11 catches or 116 yards for a $2 million bonus. Whew. That's not just like Rob Gronkowski getting $200,000. $2 million. Now, Gronk could also hit that incentive if he hits the All-Pro team. But I mean, he's competing with Travis Kelce, who's balled out this year as well. So that's not a lock as it usually is for Rob Gronkowski. So I do think that he plays. Maybe you only get a half of him, but I think if you only get a half of Rob Gronkowski, you will be happy with the production that you have gotten. You will hit value for what you have spent for him this week. Chris Meaney, who are you playing?
Yeah, and just to further that, I mean, his 382 yards over the last 4 weeks, it's by far the most among tight ends. So, I mean, it's a solid play. You're right, even if he only plays half the game or 3/4. I'm going to go Delaney Walker in just a really good spot here. I think, earlier in the season against Jacksonville, Walker had 61 yards, 4 catches. That was against, everybody playing defense for Jacksonville. You said it earlier. I think this team rests. It'd be smart to rest. I know earlier there were some reports that they weren't going to rest anybody. I am not buying that at all. And for Walker, 29 targets over the last 4 weeks, the 5th most among tight ends. He also has 3 touchdowns in his last 5 games. Walker has been the most consistent player in this Titans offense, and this is a team that needs this game. I mean, they just continue to lose and lose and lose. This is a spot where I think everybody's finally going to show up, and there's been some questionable wide receivers in this offense, but for Marcus Mariota and Delaney Walker, this has been a connection that we've seen now for a couple seasons. So over on DraftKings, I think he's a steal at $4,400.
Yeah, the price is very nice for Delaney Walker. Moving it over to the DST cash pick of the week. I'm not going to overthink it. Deshaun Kaiser has to travel into Pittsburgh. Give me the Pittsburgh Steelers. $3,900 on DraftKings, $5,400 on FanDuel. But what you want from your defense, you preferably want them at home. You want them going up a team that allows sacks, because sacks turn into fumbles. They also turn into interceptions, and Deshaun Kaiser is providing all defenses with plenty of those. So I'm not gonna overthink this one, and I'm gonna play the Steelers.
Yeah, I love that play as well. I mean, you can't overthink it for Kaiser. And, there's been some news, and we talked earlier about Week 17 being pretty wacky. And Patrick Mahomes is going to start for Kansas City. I know everybody is excited to get a look of him, and he looked really good in preseason, but that makes me actually want to play the Denver Broncos defense. This defense has actually been pretty good this season, despite allowing a lot of touchdowns and passing touchdowns. I think maybe just their poor quarterback play has led to that, but they've allowed the fourth fewest passing yards on the season, the third fewest rushing yards on the season. I expect Kansas City to rest a lot of guys, not just Alex Smith. So, I mean, at this price point, on FanDuel, $4,500 and at $2,900 on DraftKings, I think that's a pretty good price.
Absolutely. There are your cash picks. Those are done. That means we're moving over to the GPP, those tournament plays.
You down with GPP?
This is where I'm getting a little nuts this week. I think this is we call it the value play. We call it the Heart of Stone play of the week, and that is Brett Hundley.
Woo!
That was a really weird pronunciation of his last name, but I'm gonna stand by it. It now has 2 syllables. He gets to take on Detroit. Last time he played Detroit, 245 passing yards. However, 4 for 22 with a score on the ground. Put up a decent fantasy game. We've seen a few little spurts here of Brett Hundley having some juice, a few touchdowns a few games with 3 passing touchdowns each. The Detroit defense can be beat. I think it's better that Brett Hundley's in a dome personally than having to play in the tundra. So it's a strange thing to want the quarterback on the road. A little bit sketchier, but I'm with him. I think that he's cheap enough that he can open some things up for your GPP lineup. Only $4,800 on DraftKings, so that's spending way down. Who do you got, Chris Meaney?
Yeah, Mike, this is one of those weeks where you can leave some money off the board, and I'll just get that out there for some people who are wondering, because already some questions, coming through on Twitter to Ben and I about Week 17 and how does your strategy change. You can leave some money off the board. I'm not suggesting to leave like $1,000 or $2,000 off the board, but it's okay to leave $700, $800 off the board if you like your team. You don't need to spend up just because. I mean, sometimes that will get you into trouble. And I like a cheap quarterback as well, and Jacoby Brissett. Against Houston, $6,600 on FanDuel, $5,500 on DraftKings. The Texans have allowed the 10th most passing yards over the last 4 weeks. They have the 9th worst pass DVOA defense in the league. They've allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks, the 5th most to wide receivers, and the 7th most passing yards. And also, they just have allowed the most points in football. This is not a really good team, and I know Indianapolis has their issues as well, but for Brissett, and you're looking at his game log, his 2nd best fantasy output of the season came against Houston. He had over 300 yards passing. He had a couple touchdowns. So give me Jacoby Brissett in what is a good spot for him.
The reason he has all those yards is because T.Y. Hilton, generally speaking, he shows up against the Houston Texans. I don't know what it is. He just knows how to play against this team. So I love it. And, I said my Brett Hundley pick was a little bit courageous. This one might strike you as that as well. And that's Wayne Gallman.
Yes.
Running back for the New York Giants. You may not realize this, but in the last 3 games, he has 16.9, 13.9, and 12.2 points over on DraftKings because he's getting at least 6 receptions and 40 yards in each of these matchups. Now, here's the deal. Maybe we get Eli Manning. Maybe we get some Davis Webb in here playing for the New York Giants. But it doesn't matter who's playing because the Giants will be trailing against Washington, who I love, once again, with Cousins and Crowder. So I expect Gallman having to play that similar role, going to see a bunch of targets. I expect over 40 receiving yards yet again, which makes him a value play. $4,200 on DraftKings, $5,100 over on FanDuel. I like him more on DraftKings because of the full PPR situation. So it's really a recommended play for DK, not so much FanDuel. But if you're trying to spend down and you only have a little bit of money left, I think Wayne Gallman is interesting. Who do you got, Chris?
Yeah, I like that as well. He's in the ultimate DFS pass on the FanDuel write-up, but I said the exact same thing as you. 24 targets over the last 3 games, making him a stronger play on DraftKings. Samaje Perine, I really like this Washington.
You trust him?
Like you. I do trust him. And that's why he's more of a GPP play. And, last week he had that questionable tag. He didn't practice really, towards the end of the week. And he still had 17 carries. So I feel like he was fine. He caught 3 balls. Yeah, he only had 53 rushing yards. But a few weeks ago against this Giants team, he had 100 yards on the ground, and he also caught 3 balls. So I do trust him because he's cheap. And there's a couple other backs here, and I'll bring up one that I think is pretty crazy, but I'll still bring him up. But for Perine, it's just all about the Giants. It's the same reason why you like Cousins. It's the same reason why you like Crowder. I like those guys as well, and I think that they'll be able to move the ball if he can just find the end zone. If he can get me what he did last week, 50-plus yards, a couple catches, and find the end zone, he's certainly going to return value. The Giants have allowed the most yards in football, the second most passing yards, the 5th most rushing yards, 9th worst rush DVOA defense in the entire league. So I do trust him from that standpoint. Obviously, you're going to have your Saints guys. You got Shady, he's playing for something, Christian McCaffrey. But if you want to spend down a little bit, Perine for me. And then if you are into playing a lot of lineups, and I'm talking about a lot here, yeah, there's Malcolm Brown you can roll the dice on, $4,500. Maybe Brendan Oliver, $4,500 if no Gordon. But I've noticed something with Houston a lot lately, and it's Alfred Blue. I don't know what's going on here with Alfred Blue. Maybe I just wanted to say, Blue, you're my boy. Maybe that's what I just wanted to get out there.
You're my boy, Blue.
You're my boy, Blue. Let's go here. 28 carries in the last 2 games, 163 rushing yards. Last week, he had 108 yards on 16 carries. I know one of a huge play on the ground led to the over 100 yards, but at least that happened. Miller has failed to top 61 rushing yards in 10 straight games. The Colts have allowed the 2nd most rushing yards over the last 4 weeks on the season. They've allowed the 2nd most points, the 3rd most yards, the 6th most rushing yards. I think this is a good spot where we may see just a little bit more Blue here. I mean, he's starting to get more snaps and more carries and more touches than Lamar Miller. I understand Lamar Miller is the starter, but what I've seen over the past couple of weeks is this Colts team has just not been good defensively. There's been a lot of gaps. A lot of running backs have been able to run all over them. So again, this isn't a play if you're playing 1 or 2 GPP lineups, but if you are sprinkling, 7 or 8, Ben and I like to get a little bit crazy on Sundays. I think this is a spot where you can just grab him. And again, just somebody who's very, very, very cheap, $5,000 on FanDuel and on DraftKings, he's $4,000. I like the Gallman play, but on DraftKings, he's $4,000. He can catch, even though he hasn't done that lately. But I cannot ignore 28 carries in the last 2 weeks for Blue.
Yeah, and I think it's also has to do with a possibly phasing out Lamar Miller in Houston. It would shock me if he is on the team next year, and maybe they're trying to say, hey, can Alfred Blue cover for us while we address some other positions, because they need some help on other places besides running back. A little update, we have some news here that DeAndre Hopkins is now expected to miss Week 17 with a calf injury. So perhaps you do not play DeAndre Hopkins.
Wow, good call. That's interesting, because that was the guy, Mike, that I started all my lineups with. I mean, why not? It doesn't matter who's the quarterback there. I mean, he just gets touchdowns. So interesting.
My wide receiver GPP pick, I'm going with Josh Gordon. Flash Gordon. Last week was a little bit disappointing, but it was kind of expected. He's still seen 18 targets over the past 2 games. He's the big play guy. He is the number 1 target for Deshaun Kaiser. He's $5,800, so mid-price over on DraftKings, $6,700 on FanDuel. But I think that his upside this week is very interesting. Like I said, I still like the Steelers DST to make some things happen against Kaiser. But in the second half, if the Steelers have a comfortable lead and they want to start resting some defensive guys, it wouldn't shock me to see Josh Gordon rip off a big one in garbage time. So I like the play, despite Pittsburgh being a pretty solid defense altogether. Who do you got, Chris?
Well, you mentioned T.Y. Hilton earlier. I think T.Y.'s in a good spot. The home and road splits are real. This game is at home. You already mentioned that he went off against Houston earlier in the year, 175 yards and 2 touchdowns. That was 7 weeks ago. In the last 4 weeks, the Texans have allowed the 6th most receiving yards to wide receivers, the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers as well. And in fact, Houston has allowed the most 40-yard pass plays this year. So this is a really good spot for T.Y. Hilton. I love that stack. And Josh Doxson, again, going back to this Washington
he's very
team.
interesting. interesting.
Yeah, he is. I mean, $5,800 on FanDuel. How about $4,400 on DraftKings? I mean, wow, that just kind of jumps out at you. And Doxson, 13 targets last week, and he only caught a couple of balls. It was against Denver. Going back to that secondary, I still believe in Denver, but this is a much better spot against the Giants. And for Doxson, he's had 3 touchdowns in his last 5 games. He had a touchdown last week, and the Giants have allowed a league-high 10 touchdowns to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks, 6 touchdowns to wide receivers, the second most over that span. And on the year, they've allowed the most yards and the second most yards, or most passing yards, rather. So Josh Doxson, sign me up for just a lot of Washington this week.
Moving to the tight end, I gave you that that Mercedes-Benz, that Rolls-Royce of the tight end position, Mr. Rob Gronkowski. So I'm going to give you this play as well because he costs $2,700 on DraftKings. That is Vance McDonald. Maybe we're now seeing Vance McDonald getting worked into the offense. Last week, caught 4 of his 5 targets, 52 yards. They traded for him for a reason because Jesse James is just not a dynamic pass-catching threat at the tight end position. Vance McDonald is. However, he's been struggling with injury. So I think that he is interesting with the price. Gets to play against the Browns defense. They're 5th worst in pass DVOA. They've allowed the 14th most passing yards on the season. We all know in fantasy football that if you're looking to stream a tight end, figure out who's playing the Giants, figure out who's playing the Cleveland Browns, and that's Vance McDonald this week. So I do believe that he is very interesting, especially considering the price. Chris Meaney, who are you going with?
I love Vance, Refrigerator Vance. I'm going to go...
Refrigerator Vance? I don't even understand the reference.
I don't either. It's a friend of the show, Pat Mayo, always used to call him Refrigerator Vance
Mayo?
McDonald. Yeah, I think there's going back to it, I think that there's in Canada, there's just Refrigerator Vance is a company.
So Mayo's bringing the references that everyone can really understand.
So everyone can really understand. You're right. Yeah.
There's this tiny little town in Canada.
Apologies to the listeners south of the border for that one. Jimmy Graham, hands off Jimmy. Don't touch Jimmy. Why would anybody touch Jimmy Graham? He's got 3 catches for 2 yards over the last 3 games. That makes me want to play this guy. Because I know that the upside is there. He has 10 touchdowns on the season. He leads the league with 26 red zone targets. He leads the league with 16 red zone catches. I know this is a tougher matchup against Arizona, and Arizona is going to come to play. I mean, who knows? This is going to be Bruce Arians' last game there, Larry Fitz's last game. They're going to want to knock out Seattle, and Seattle needs to have this game. There's no more messing around here. And earlier in the year, 2 scores against Arizona. The 9 targets he saw in that game was the 3rd most he's seen all year. The 6 catches he had in that game, the 3rd most he had all year. I think that they're going to lean on Jimmy Graham here. And again, I'm just looking at some of the pricing, and you gave a fantastic cheap play in McDonald. And then I look over on DraftKings and I see Jimmy Graham at $4,800, and I'm just like,
it's not bad.
It's not bad. I know there's a couple guys in that range. You know, Greg Olsen is starting to heat up, but he's over almost 50. He's $5,600. Ebron has been feeling it lately, 45. Jack Doyle in that range, but I just want the guy with the most upside and the guy that I know is going to get the ball when Seattle gets inside the red zone, especially inside the 5, Mike. They don't run the ball. They throw to Jimmy Graham, and we saw the 1-yard strike he had last week for a touchdown. So I'm going to play Jimmy Garoppolo and what I think is going to just be low ownership.
Jimmy Graham, sorry. Jimmy Garoppolo. You got confused by the handsomeness.
I did. It's on my mind. It's bothering me a little bit.
All right. While Chris Meaney cools down after getting hot and bothered, thinking about Jimmy Graham, we're getting to our favorite stacks here.
Stack Attack.
All right. These are going to shock you. If you've listened to the rest of the show, these are going to shock you. My favorite stack this week is Kirk Cousins and Jamison Crowder. No surprises there. Chris Meaney, do you have any shockers for us?
No shockers here either, Mike. I mean, Brissett and T.Y.
Yep, I love it.
The whole Jimmy G, obviously.
Yeah, Jimmy G and Goodwin is also, I think, a very solid foundation.
And cheap stacks, too.
All right, well, that was quick and easy. Let's get to the best part of the show, the Battle Royale.
DFS Battle Royale.
This one is a big one, ladies and gentlemen. The Week 17, the final full slate DFS Battle Royale between me and Chris Meaney. Ben Cummins loses automatically, so I at least get second place. which makes me feel a little bit better. But my lineup, that makes me feel great. So I'm going to let you start it off, Chris. Who you got?
A lot of the guys, Mike, unfortunately, that we've been talking about. So I encourage everybody to check out the DFS Ultimate Pass. Only $10. I mean, it's a steal. We'll be with you right through the playoffs. So Kirk Cousins is going to be my quarterback. I got Jamal Williams and Derrick Henry as my running backs. And I don't care if DeMarco Murray plays. This guy is not going to be effective. And for Henry, a really solid game earlier in the year against Jacksonville. Over 90 rushing yards, and he saw 10-plus defenders in the box over 60% of the time. So he was really good that week. I had DeAndre Hopkins against you. I guess I'll just swap him out for Julio Jones. Julio Jones, again, some pretty nice numbers for Atlanta up against Carolina, and they've given up a lot of just passing yards to wide receivers and touchdowns of late. So I'll put in Julio Jones there. Jamison Crowder, $5,800. T.Y. Hilton. And this is for you guys. Antonio Gates at the tight end position.
Yeah,
that is for you guys. Yeah, congrats on you guys. I thought that was a huge call, and this is a really good spot for him against the. In fact, the Raiders are giving up the most yards to tight end, so I like that as a lot at $4,200. Alex Collins in at the flex, and I mentioned the Broncos, and again, leaving $500 off the board, looking to upgrade elsewhere. Don't feel like you have to, guys.
All right, we share a lot of the same players here. I have the Kirk Cousins, Jamison Crowder stack. I, of course, have T.Y. Hilton and Derrick Henry. Here are our differentiators. I'm going with Carlos Hyde. He gets to take on the Los Angeles Rams, who they have bled points to the running back position pretty much all year long. Carlos Hyde's only $4,900. On top of that, the Rams are going to be resting people, and San Francisco is going to want to win this game. Carlos Hyde's playing for a new contract elsewhere or with San Francisco. I'm looking for Carlos to have a very solid game. Jarvis Landry, I'm plugging him in. He has been an absolute PPR machine this year. In fact, Jarvis Landry, by my calculations, 103 receptions.
Yeah, 5 catches in every game.
That's called tops of the league. Well, I mean, Jarvis Landry's just not getting the love that he deserves. So I've got him plugged in. I've got Gronk. I spent up for him the $7K at my tight end position. At my flex, for some reason, maybe they're scared of the matchup. Maybe they're scared that he kind of pooped his pants last week. $5,600. Devonta Freeman at home against the Panthers, a must-win game for the Atlanta Falcons. Yes, please. I will sign up for that. And with all the thrown salary at Gronk, I had to save some money here for the DST, and I went with the Colts because now that looks even better. A Hopkins list, Houston Texans with garbage heap at the quarterback position. So I like the Colts. Some turnovers, get some sacks. So there it is, ladies and gentlemen. Short and sweet this week because we don't have Ben jibber-jabbering away. Just kidding. He'll be back next week. We love you, Ben. Until then, good luck with your DFS situation this week. If you're playing in a Week 17 championship, we encourage you. We hope you win, but make sure you change your league next year to not do that because that's bad. Until next time, I'm Mike, the Fantasy Hitman Wright, for Chris Meaney, the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at www.thefantasyfootballers.com.